Okay, so I was saying that I grew up with like a financier dad, and I've been saying it in All for Love, your quintessential like benevolent patriarch, right? Because he was always like the provider, and my mom was always the one that stayed at home. I should mention that my mom grew up the daughter of a rich man, right? So she was used to wealth. She was used to being like completely covered by her father. And my grandfather did see that in my father, and my father proved it to be correct about him because with each child, he became more successful in his career. So I grew up with this, seeing this, observing this. And when we got married, we also had the so-called traditional roles where the husband is the one who goes into the world of work and provides, and then the wife is more of like staying in the domain of the home. But I also worked. Like I've always had like something that I receive income from since I was 18. So I was a writer. By 18, I was a staff writer just on one of these small, like local Christian magazines um, at the time. So this is like way back in like the late 90s. Okay. Fast forward, I grew up with a father who also talked about money, and I would hear him, talk about like the stock market and like expanding your wealth and like being wise with your spending, all of that. It was just very much living inside of, well, all of us, my brothers and myself. I have two younger brothers, right? So when I started having my own business, which was after the birth of my first child, right? At that time, I was still mommy blogging. So this was around the time of like the golden age of like mommy blogs, where every mom had a website, and that's how the coaching began. Because as I was just writing, like writing blog posts, which no longer exists. I took the website down a long time ago, but like how to be a work at home mom. So again, I was like speaking about women and money, right? But in the context always of, being the stay-at-home mom, being taken care of, like la la la. And then that started to kind of like build momentum. And I started to around the realms of going to the realms of like personal branding, which is the art of teaching a woman how to posture herself like online and, like draw, like magnetize like other clients in. So that was a big piece of the coaching from 2012 all the way to like 2016, because that's when there kind of like had to be a pivot, right? And the pivot was when my husband lost his job and I had to be like the primary provider. And that's where I started to see, that was where I got curious about like, why doesn't this feel good for him? Why doesn't this feel good for me? Right. And that's when I got curious about like, this has to do this something or some things that are making us feel all the things has something to do with our biology. And it does, like masculinity and femininity at the level of our biology, because biology is truth. You can't change how a you can't change a man's like penetrative, even if he doesn't know it, his penetrative aspect to apply his will to life. I've seen what that does to a man who does not get to do that, right? I've also seen the other side. Yeah, yeah. So a man has to, I teach women, and this is not my teaching. This is a teaching of biologists like throughout the invention of the study of man and woman, is that women are biologically valuable, men are biologically useful. Actually, the correct term is disposable. And there's a reason for using the word disposable because men will rather die than be useless. Like it's in their biology. It explains the suicide rates of men.
Mm.
It's like if I'm not useful society, what the hell am I here for? Right? And you look at like the correlation of how many more men kill themselves when they are jobless, when they when they are retrenched, when they are not successful. It's high. And there is a direct correlation to that and money, right? Because, and Jillian teaches this, money is very embryonic to women, but it has been in the domain of men ever since. So it is epigenetic inside of a man to make money, to produce income, to be the one that brings it in, right? To penetrate his family with it. If not, they feel useless, like their sex as a male, right, feels useless. And I didn't used to understand that because, of course, within the world of personal branding and teaching women how to put themselves out there, unconsciously I co-opted with the whole like women, empower the women movement, right? Which is, like women are powerful. Our power is just never going to be, nor can it be compared with male strength, male will, and like how the quality that they have to apply their will into penetratively into something. So like money making, like and there's a distinction also with money making and wealth amplification, because wealth amplification is actually a feminine trait, right? Applying your will to make money, and I see this in my father especially, right? My dad's always been like an employee, a high level one, and my mom always reminds me of this, right? She's like, your dad's always been like the best employee, and that is why people value him. People pour money into a man who applies his will well. And so even if he never like owned like his own business. He was always like a president, a CEO, which she still is now of some several companies, right? That is because of that biological usefulness. Like if I am not being used, I am useless. That's what men say, like at the DNA level. And that's not me teaching that, right? This is men, like scientists, psychologists who are male writing these documents, kind of like in 1820, when the book Mothers was written by Robert Briffault, and he coined the term biologically valuable, biologically disposable. So this lives inside of men, and it also lives inside of women, right? So when women prove by doing and being used, it doesn't always feel good because we're actually already valuable as we are by virtue of our capacity to be seated and to gestate and give birth. That's both the biological and, as Jillian likes to say, kind of like the psychoerotic spiritual. So it's
Mm.
true on all levels, right? But with money and men, we really have to understand that that domain um, is something that is co-creational between the two of us. So I mentioned that wealth amplification is feminine. I like to use the example of the Proverbs 31 woman in the Bible, right? So Proverbs 31 is actually a Hebraic text on wisdom. It's all symbology and metaphors, right? And wisdom is always written as a woman. as is folly. So folly and wisdom are the main characters in the book of Proverbs in the Bible, and they are categorically written as the feminine. So as a wise woman or as a foolish woman. And the wise woman, if you look in the book of Proverbs, right, which ends in that 31st chapter that describes her as, a wealthy woman with who is in charge of her husband's assets and invests here and invests there. That is a quality of the feminine to what the masculine, or in this case, the male, her husband, would seed into her. So this woman, if she was like a literal woman, she was married to a wealthy man who was a respected leader. The text writes him as being seated at the city gates. So it could have meant that he was a man of great importance, politician, or a businessman. But she amplified the wealth. She would buy a field. She would invest in garments. She would like do this, do that. So the domain of like amplifying the wealth, just like the egg amplifying and becoming a baby, has always been in like the domain of the feminine, both like the mythical archetypal feminine and women, in fact, right? So you can have like a, let's say, what they call like a polarized relationship between a man and a woman. And Dr. Patricia Allen has actually written about this. She writes a story of Suzanne and Jerome in her book, Getting to I Do. And Jerome was your typical salary man, right? He was actually a college professor. And then Suzanne was a caterer. So she was the businesswoman. And the nature of like wedding catering is very big. Like those are big contracts, big profits, right? And so she wrote about this relationship to illustrate the difference between the money piece and then the maleness, right? So Suzanne and Jerome were a polarized couple because even if he made half of what she was making, right? AKA uh, lower salary compared to what she would bring in her business. He maintained like the male territorial leadership of the relationship. So meaning he would lead sexually, he would lead the relationship and steer the course of this is where we're going to go. I'm going to marry you, blah, blah, blah. Like I will take care of the basic needs while you can do your catering and, it makes you happy and whatever. So they ended up getting married, and they ended up getting married with that dynamic. Now, usually you'd hear like, oh, he has to make like 7 times more than she does, right? For them to be respecting each other. There's truth to that. And there's also truth to the biology. So in this case, this couple was so very like sexually potent together that it overrode entirely like this very rigid aspect of he has to make like 7 figures for her to respect him. In
Mm-hmm.
this case, what Jerome did, and this is what I teach women too, right, was he maintained like the male leadership of the relationship. So remember, like our DNA is very ancient. Before we had money, before we had like dollar signs and zeros in our bank account, we had, he's a male, so without him, I will die because I can get eaten, I can get killed by another man. So he needs to feel respected for the strength that he brings, the maleness that he brings. And this is how this Suzanne character saw Jerome. Whilst he, this woman, she is so feminine. She makes me feel a certain way that I've never felt with another woman. So I want to cherish her. I want to adore her. I want to pour into her like sexually and like spiritually. And of course, they ended up moving in together and getting married. He took care of what I call the evolutionary basics. So like boring things like utilities and the bills and the car payments and things like that. And then Suzanne would take care of the things that felt good. So the feel good, do good, feel good formula is a Dr. Pat Allen formula, right? So she would like say, as long as they maintain the maleness and the femaleness, things worked. It's the same with money, right? So when a man like is making less money, again, we use that binary to kind of like divide them along one category of like more or less. That is fine as long as he still feels like he is the male owner of the territory in the relationship and she feels like the claimed, cherished, and cared for element of the relationship, regardless of how much money her business makes.
Hmm. No,
So
but
when a man and a woman maintain that, sorry, yeah,
I think there's a little bit
yeah.
of a time lag. I'm just noticing. It's all right though.
Oh,
Um,
yeah, it
thought,
is.
I just let you keep going because it was so good. And I don't want to throw off anything you're saying, but so much is resonating with me that you're saying, Martine, including when you're talking about that it's not about who's making more money. It can
It's
be,
never about that.
but it's really about the energetics behind it.
It
And
is, yeah.
and I'm thinking even of like what is it when someone's a gold digger or when you might be not even providing financially as the woman, but you hold
Mm,
and in
yeah,
the holding of reins and not respecting a man's leadership and him feeling like he's an ATM that you're just withdrawing from, that default.
exactly right. It's a default because I've told this to women. The men who have money, and this is not to vilify men who have money, they can be throwing money at you and 17 other girls, right? But a man who adores and devotes to you, that is part of his like masculine instinct towards you. That's different because you can have a very rich man. And one of my examples is, so let's say he's your sugar daddy and he's giving you $30,000 a month and a car and paying for your apartment, but he is making $100 million. That's like $10 for him, right? So it's not about how rich a man is, but what is his devotion to you? Does he adore you, right? Does he have a aspect of I cannot live without her energy? Because remember, we don't actually need to do anything for men. If we do, if men require us to do, like to prove to me, like whatever, just like they prove to themselves, because they do that. They prove to themselves how successful they can be, how strong they can be, how willing they can be. But they don't actually require that from women. But how
Although
we are, yeah, yeah. Okay.
I will say that some of the shadow I see in the masculine, even thinking back to my own relationships, is
Yeah.
who are asking women to prove themselves to them.
Oh, yeah. Yes, yes,
And
yes.
it
That's
feels,
the shadow aspect. Yeah.
yeah, and it feels like an imposition of this more masculine consciousness of like hierarchy and proving and being useful. And then
Yes.
a woman, like, show me how useful you are for me, woman. And then for us as
Yes.
like when I feel that from a man, like my feminine just crumples and feels so horrible because I don't feel like I'm being cherished for just the feminine that I am. And I think it's a misconception.
Yes.
It's not that as a woman, I'm not flowing back to a man,
Yeah.
but that may
Yes,
not look
you are.
like me, paying the bill or doing
Yeah.
something for him or in a way that a man would do. And it's led to a lot
Yeah.
of confusion for me because I thought like, oh, I need to do more for men. When in reality, like, that
Mm.
left me feeling drained and feeling like completely out of touch with my feminine side. But that's what I was modeled with growing up.
Yeah, yeah. And I can understand that, especially, I think what's interesting is observing it from so many different like cultural, societal, spiritual lenses, right? So like you know how in a camera you can change the lens through which you view the subject, right? So dialing it back to, let's say, a cultural lens. And I've shared this in AFL a lot of times, right? I have zero concept of not being covered. Zero. I don't know what that is. I have no idea of like 18 years old and like getting my own apartment. I don't know what that is. I've never lived inside of that experience, right? Because culturally, it's not done here, you know, for families who have eldest daughters or daughters in general who are not married. You stay with your father, you stay within cover until you get married or until a you have enough of like masculine frame around you, like you make your own money and you are the one who willingly, you know, like wants to leave the domain of the father, right? But culturally, we stay with our parents as eldest daughters, as daughters in general. I'm an eldest daughter, so that tends to be my reference point. So epigenetically, I've never had to prove to my father that I get to stay in his territory, right? Because he's like, no, you stay here, right? No one's marrying you yet. So I got married when I was 28, right? So you may not have your own condo, you know, you may not have your own, you know, kind of like live by yourself. And that's interesting because I feel like when we as women have that, or we are given the opportunity for that, it lends us to something that is very unnatural for us at first because we have not architected like the healthy tones around frame structure, masculine principles. We go into unconscious feminist undertones and start to say, hey, I have a car. Hey, this is my apartment. Hey, you know, kind of like how men used to have to prove to the chieftain or the father, this is how much land I have. This is how many oxen I have. I can, you know, I can work for 2 years to prove to you that I can marry your daughter. Because the daughter, the woman always symbolized the potential for his potency, his seed. Without her, he would not be able to have progeny, which, you know, for since time immemorial, for men has been the marker of masculinity. It is to produce lineage, right? So when we kind of like step outside of that, and that is true of all cultures, right? That is true of all cultures that the man um, desire to seed and to pass on his, you know, like his genome into the next generation, right? And all of that kind of like has to do with his capacity to prove his value, to prove that I am a valuable man. And that's where you get the term high value man. It's from biology, right? Because if I cannot prove to, and men are the ones that actually naturally fall under hierarchy in the workplace, for instance, just to interject. When a, and I teach this to women, when a woman, two women, let's say in the workplace, are vying for a promotion and another woman gets it, what do women usually do, like at the primal level? Well, because we are maladapted to compete with each other, we might say, oh, yeah, girl, you know, like high five, congratulations. But underneath, like that bitch, you know, right? So that's kind of like the operating system of the female nervous system and psyche. The male, and I learned this from my husband as well, he's like, when a man and another man are competing for a promotion, and another one gets it, literally, he will buy that man a drink and congratulate him.
Right.
because epigenetically at the DNA level, he's like, if I do not protect myself and get onto the good side of this man, be his ally, be his, like the ancient term for it is like his azer, which is like a Jewish word for helper, right? I put my family at risk because I put my job at risk, I put provision at risk, all of the things. And so men have a built-in respect for other men who perform better than they do, who earn more than they do, and they willingly place themselves in submission to that, right? So when you apply that to the world of men and you compare it to like the experience of women, it's very different. They naturally appreciate one another. They naturally have allyship and regard, high regard for the other, because in the system of men, like the epigenetic system of men, that hierarchy protects all. Because remember, the men in that hierarchy likely have women and children that are dependent on them. With women, because this is very, again, embryonic to us to have the domain of money, to be in the domain of money, we're still ancient in our DNA. So we are still very much about solving for our own desires and safety and consumption, right? There's a reason why in the marketplace, women are the consumer market, right? When you talk about economics and things like that, it is in the domain of women. It is because we are, if we are not aware of it, solipsistic by nature. And we have to be because we bear the children. We are oriented to gather resources for survival. And so the way we architect around money is also the same way. Like we will grab for it, we will grasp for it, right? It's a very different energetic versus kind of what is epigenetic inside of males, which is positioning myself strategically. So the money comes to me. So the money goes to me and goes into my family. For women, it's very different. It's like, oh, this feels so good to kind of like be penetrated masculine by the masculine through the entity of money, right? Which in itself is neutral on the top side world, but in the energetics, it's a very penetrative entity, right? And so women, we're still navigating our relationship with that because it's not been part of our coding, right? Money was first invented for men to exchange with other men in the domains that men ruled and kind of like had influence. Women had money too, but a lot of women, unless they were in the upper echelons, money was just very practical. I've said this before. Like a lot of women think that being a feminine woman is me teaching women how to be like honey housewives and like go for gold diggers. No, it's not that. It's teaching women how to have like profound respect for all that the masculine is in their men and in the masculine principles in life, including money. So that's why I teach women to invest their money to create assets because assets birth more wealth, more creational codes, right? So for women, our gifting is really in amplifying the wealth that starts off as a seed that our men give us. Say they are the proverbial providers, right? Like here, honey, like my grandfather, he had they had that very traditional role of he would bring home the bacon and she would kind of like manage the household. So my grandfather, he would actually give his entire salary to my grandmother, right? And she would resource that. That is how literally it is done, kind of like in the old world, let's say. But now, because again, we have been taught through the equal rights movement, the egalitarianism that exists inside of our society, that a woman is a provider. She can create wealth, she can create her own income, but providership is really in the domain of the man. Because in epigenetics, it is in the domain of his DNA. The sperm is the one that provides the code that makes the next human being that they create, right? She creates kind of like the material, right? But he provides the pattern, right? The
Mhm.
sperm provides the patterning, the egg provides the kind of like the material, like the blood, bones, and flesh of that child that is to be. So when we apply that to the world of money, and a woman in relationship with her money, for instance, like let's say she is in a masculine relationship with her job, and money, of course, is channeled into that job and into her bank account, right? What she creates from that, right, is still dependent on the function of money in our society, which is currency, which is potential no, I lost my word. But basically potentiated value that you make of that money. $10 is not just $10. Invested properly and grown with interest, it can be $100, right? But again, there has to be that marriage of the masculine and feminine before any growth or amplification or co-creation will happen. So I like to remind women of this, that you are not creating this wealth. You are still being penetrated by the masculine principle. You cannot escape, we cannot escape his penetration,
Mm,
including wealth amplification.
yeah. I've absolutely noticed that even as someone who is an entrepreneur and who does create things and put them out into the world, I've had so much confusion trying to learn business because so much of that framework comes from a masculine lens. And so I approached business from a masculine perspective of like, let me go for it and put it out there and create the plan. And like, not that women can't have plans, but I was approaching everything the way that I saw worked for men in business.
Yeah. Mm.
What you're saying about being able to be penetrated by wealth, even if you
Yes.
are creating a business or you are working for a company, it's being able to receive that and let that move through that creates the circuit
Yeah.
natural for us as women. And when I try
Yes,
to go the
exactly.
other direction and I'm kind of going out,
Mm.
out, out, and I'm doing a lot of like pushy marketing and I'm like, here's what I'm creating, and I'm just putting it out, out, out. I feel drained and it's like all of my magnetism disappears. I've had so many
Yeah.
me who I find as clients or who are interested in my work because they are magnetically drawn to me. And it's not because I
Yes,
was trying to push something out.
exactly. And that is why it is so, it is our responsibility to actually become conscious of that. A lot of women in the feminine business space are not actually co-creating with God a feminine business. They are actually co-creating from a distorted template because of the matrix they live inside of, right? And so that's why sometimes it doesn't feel entirely um, good, like to be in, say, the personal development space, which is I love that space. I began in that space, with individuals like Tony Robbins and Bob Proctor and all the men. But I started to realize, I can have all these like wealth codes. I can attend all like the Grant Cardone things and all the things that great men are producing out there, but I am still a woman. So how I have approached like the entrepreneurial topside world of men is as a gatherer. Oh,
Mm.
that's nice. Like I think that's really juicy. Okay, let's bring it all in. Let's gather the data that feels good. Now, how can I create from this? So it's very much like in terms of the archetypes, this is kind of like the huntress, and then also the enchantress and the sage, kind of like the ingredients that go into my cauldron of like alchemy.
Itchy.
And right? And how does this look like for me? Because I'm such a lover of lineage. And so in my lineage, the women have always been what we call babaylan, which is like the shamans. The women are the shamans here, right? So they are known to know how to create alchemy from alchemy. And so they were considered equal in power to like the datu, which are the chieftains. So the Philippines is an archipelago. So we weren't a nation before. We were small islands with very Gaian indigenous tribes among the islands. And so women and men held um, the same like kind of like power, except male power was like raw strength. So they were the warriors, they were the usurpers of other islands, right? Conquerors. So they applied their will and their strength to the land, to their bodies, towards dominion. Women, we were always in like the mystical realms. We were also kind of like, we could also own land and gold, because the Philippines is rich in gold, in the same capacity as a man. But we were accorded with like the spiritual gifts. So the babaylan are shamans, right? We were seen as like the channels and the vessels that received from the gods. And so when you go to a babaylan for healing, for prayer, for intuition, for her intuitive gifts, it also included bringing your wealth, like for her to intuit. This is what you should do with that. This is what I think you should invest in, or this is the woman I think you should marry, or whatever, right? Our epigenetic code as like Filipino women, that's not even our name, but it is what it is now, was kind of like the unseen realms of like wealth, of creation, of the mystical. And for feminine wealth to be, like in integrity with our nature, it also has to have that quality, like the money that comes in through a woman's, channels, which is her business. Business is just a channel. Business is just a resource. It isn't the feminine entity. You are, right? Because remember, feminine is hosted by the female. It's not like a floaty concept out there. So you bring the wealth codes as a female to what your business creates. And so this is why I remind women, you know, the way that you actually amplify that wealth may be very different from how these kind of like financial teachers teach you. And that's okay, right? Because it has to be true for you. It has to feel good for you. So you don't want to invest in the stock market? Don't invest in the stock market. You don't want to do Forex? Don't do that. Could you hire somebody to do that, to do it for you? Absolutely, which I'm all for. Like I'm all for fund managers. I have fund managers. I just say, here's the money, make it grow, which is very for me, somebody who doesn't like looking at numbers. I mean, I do, but I don't like figuring out how they got there, right? I'm like, just show me how much it has grown in this quarter, right? Please, just show me just allow me to kind of like know how much is in my sons and my daughters' kind of like portfolios, and that will be, thank you very much for that. So it's very different from applying your like what I call kind of like your over functioning to that, because I would rather be inside of my gifts, mentoring women, being with my children, making meals, than being 8 hours of the day inside of like the administrative nitty-gritty aspects of the business, right?
Mhm.
So a lot of like how women see money is beyond what lands in my bank account, what is inside of my PayPal or my Venmo or whatever that I channel into my master budget. But okay, like what is going to feel really good and amplified for me rather than extractively managing this fund and that fund and this asset.
Mm.
So a lot of like women's relationship with money also has to do with her relationship with the people who are good with money. That's been a experience that has also been modeled for me by my mom and dad, right? My mom, she's just like she just doesn't have to handle it, but she has it
Mm.
because it is managed well by the people whose strengths lie in managing money, in amplifying wealth, in advising her, okay, maybe you should invest here, you should invest there, right? So a woman's comfort level, even around the word invest and asset, right, has to do with the right relationship that she creates with money itself. That it is not just this thing that is created from being an entrepreneur, but it is actually a seeding into other people. My money gives other people jobs, which in effect takes care of their families, which in effect makes sure that their families feel good so that they can do good. Because families are a creational unit, right? That is in an ecosystem that we are all co-creating. So as you can see, I hope that wasn't so convoluted, but like that's how I see money. It's not
Well,
just this thing from
and
my business. It's
one
in
thing
an ecosystem.
I'm noticing as you're speaking, this last piece, Martine, is I'm seeing like a web, this interconnected web
Yeah,
that's
you
flowing
got
back.
it.
And it also feels like, again, taking it from a cultural lens, it is much more collaborative and collective than it is this very individualistic model, which is like it's me and mine,
Yeah,
as opposed to like the word trust kept coming up. And of course, there has to be
yeah,
discernment. Trust. Blind trust is
yeah.
dangerous, and that is an unevolved version
Yes.
of feminine to just say, I don't want to handle it, like
Mm,
care of it. I don't want to deal with those numbers. I don't want
mm,
to handle my budget.
yeah.
Like that's not an evolved version of
That's
feminine.
not right relationship. Yeah.
And yet this willingness to be in deep trust and in connection with a man, to be in a devotional, committed both ways relationship with a man where it's not just me and you, it is me and you, but
Yeah.
there's also the us, and this willingness
Yeah.
to
The we. Mm.
create that, yeah, exactly, to create the we, and to like, even just I'm thinking of that image of a woman who's like pregnant and being like nourished by like the man who brings the food and like the shelter that's provided, and like she is kind of in a vulnerable state, like, and the egg as well is in a vulnerable state, like it has to be
It
protected,
is.
but in order to allow ourselves as women to even receive that provision, whether it's coming through a man or kind of the divine provision that flows through an employer or our business or whatever it may be, like there is a huge journey for those of us who were not encoded the same way that you were,
Yeah.
with kind of
Mm.
understanding like I am cared for, I am provided for. There's this journey of moving through all of that fear and discomfort of allowing ourselves to open our systems to
Mm.
and to be cared for, because I cannot be like a completely independent, self-sufficient, like I've got me and nobody can come in entity, and simultaneously have this kind of relationship with money that allows me to be in the feminine and to receive and to flow back. Like the two cannot be
Mm.
simultaneously.
Yeah, yeah. And when we are, like you said, it's a web, kind of like everything is intertwined and interconnected with each other. That is actually what feels good to a woman in terms of like money and wealth, because a a web, kind of is also a type of holder.
Hmm.
And we need holding. We need frame. It's just non-negotiable for a feminine woman, right? She cannot be all that she bees and is without containment, without, like that quality of being held. One of the principles that is very real for me and that I ensure my son and daughter have the distinction of it is that it is the feminine that is held, right? I have an 8-year-old daughter. She will grow up very much around the same values that I grew up in, right? And I'm very um, deliberate in the way I teach my son, for instance, how to architect as the provider to her, but also reminding her that she also gives back because she is given too. And so when we, and those are children, okay, but when we kind of like relate that microcosm to the bigger, well, not really the bigger world, but more of like other aspects of like providership and receivership. It's also the same. Like there has to be that consciousness of what is that sorting through of like what is the feminine aspect of this thing, like this business, for instance. The feminine aspect of my business is all of the creational codes, the transmissions, the thing that literally, when I sit down in front of my laptop and talk to a woman and take a woman through a practice, mentor a group of women, it is what is being channeled through me. That is the feminine aspect of the business. And that has to be held within a web of, gosh, like structure, frame, accountability, even. That's why I also ensure that I have advisors, financial advisors, a coach, a mentor, a husband, like all of that, is held within that web of framing so that I can come inside of these spaces literally and I'm not worrying. I'm not like worrying about, oh, how much revenue kind of like is this? Yes, I know that part. I'm very much in right relationship with looking at numbers and hi, baby. Happy birthday. I love you. That's my son. It's his birthday today. He's
Mm.
14.
Yay.
Gosh, right? Yeah, I forgot what I was saying. I was hugging him. But like, yeah, okay. So that type of like holding, the holding principle is really a woman's, especially if she's in business, it is her responsibility to have a felt sense of that whenever and however she shows up in her business, right? The thing she runs away from, you can liken that to the teaching around holding the opposite. It's a Marion Woodward teaching, holding the tension of the opposite. Like, let's say, oh, I don't like numbers. I don't like, looking at how much income that the business, the ROI. I don't understand, I don't understand kind of all the things. I mean, it's not about deeply understanding it, but it's about holding yourself through, like Marion Woodward says, the tension of the opposite thing. So the things that you like, I love transmissions. I love being in spaces with women. I love holding space with women, but ew, I don't like talking about the business. I don't need a quarterly review. I do not like, it's kind of like a petulance and a childish avoidance of things, but that's not being in your woman.
Mm,
And if you're not in your woman, how can you be with all the textures and layers of a man as well? So I
mm,
like to remind women to not have this collusion with petulance. It's kind of like also a unconscious um, attachment to the puella, to like the little girl, the maiden when it comes to money. The
mm.
maiden aspect of a woman has to be penetrated by the financial aspect of money. Otherwise, she stays a little girl, pretending not to know what she has to be responsible for, right? And so personally, I personally I don't handle things like my bookkeeping and my taxes. There is a team for that. But I know if sufficiently how that works. Whereas before I would avoid the penetration of that. And avoiding penetration in any layer that has to do with money or financials is disrespectful to the masculine. It's a form of disrespect.
That's
It's a
exactly
form,
what I
yeah.
was thinking of as you were saying all of this. And even the image of the little girl who's kind of, or the little girl aspect that is avoiding and like, oh, I just don't like it. I don't want to handle it.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
form of disrespect.
Yes. And I think that's where the whole sugar baby, gold digger distortion comes from as well. Because you can absolutely be a sugar baby. You can absolutely marry a rich man. But to be like the archetypal, like ditzy, I know nothing, spoiled baby girl archetype is not a devotional woman. A devotional woman is the one that enjoys the delights of money, like truly enjoys it, because she has also become a master of relating with it. She's not just, like you said, making her man feel like an ATM, which men do not want that. At the deepest level of their usefulness, they they will move mountains for a woman that they love, but love includes devotion and respect, right? So and I think that's where even devotionally templated women get categorized with the real gold diggers, those that have not been penetrated by masculine principles and their maiden is still like running amok, right? They're unintegrated maiden, unpenetrated maiden. But women who are living charmed, provided for lives know how to architect the maiden. And the maiden is what I used to describe the felt sense of a man to want to feed, buy things, gift, pour into a woman. So it's like I have a very um I really feel it, like felt sense of my maiden when I'm with my husband. Like sometimes I just have to make a face at him and he's done. He's like, what do you want? Like, right? And at the same time, I am also to him, a queen who gives him counsel. who he seeks the counsel of. What do you think, babe? Here's two choices. Like, what do you think I should do? What do you think would be? Of course, he always makes the ultimate decisions because it's a very important creational code for me that he be right. Okay. But for women who want to really devotionally template with responsibility towards money, towards the masculine, and towards men, it means that she must be able to, have the capacity for that, for all of those sensations, including being responsible for budget, bank accounts, where, my investments are. Do I even have investments? Am I even growing? Like, the wealth that is coming through to me, right? Women who decide to be in a very adult relation, mature, conscious, and integrated relationship with money will notice that as a mirror for her. Your money will always be a mirror for you of your relationship with the masculine, right? So women need to be responsible for what they get to heal when they're face to face with money or an issue around money or finances or growth or investing. It's always going to be a mirror to how much receptiveness she has in that level, in that dimension of the masculine. So, yeah, I mean, I could go on and on about that, by the way.
Mm. Well, something that's coming up as you're speaking, Martine, is that we all have the masculine and the feminine aspect within us. And even though our biology does make a difference and there is a different proportional flow of masculine and feminine in a biological woman than a biological
Yeah.
man, I, as a woman, still have a masculine aspect. And the way that I carry myself around things like structure and budgets and planning and money, like that's also an aspect of my masculine consciousness. And then that gets mirrored to me through the man that I'm with and the way that he relates. And his may be bigger and stronger and more pronounced because he's in more of a masculine energy relative to me. And that's rightful because that's a natural flow. But if I am not, don't have that erectness in my
Mm.
masculinity, it's like,
Yeah.
well, the husband goes away or the provider goes away, that then what? Do I just collapse? Do I collapse or just throw my hands up in the air, or do I have that capacity erected in
Yeah.
so that it's
Yes.
no longer like a damsel in distress, like someone just save me,
Mm.
I don't want to handle it. It's like when I'm able to access that feeling of being able to create that and hold myself, then
Mm.
that's mirrored to me by a man who has that capacity to hold me. But I can't ask a man to provide that frame, whether that's in money or emotions or anything. I can't ask him to hold me to the degree that I have not developed that kind of masculine architecture in myself.
Yes, yes. And that is what I mean about like being the self-responsible, right? Being that consciousness being awakened inside of ourselves. That's nobody can do that for us. No man can do that for us. No other can do that for us, right? It is like, okay, do I avoid this? Do I avoid the growth? Why is it so dark? Oh, it's gonna rain. Okay. Do you need me to turn on the light or you're fine with
So
this? Okay.
we'll wrap up soon to
Yeah.
talk as well. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, that's what I mean about like the responsibility to self, the devotion to self as well. Because nobody can say we cannot outsource that to a savior, right? Nobody's going to come to save us from our ego. You know, the ego death is ours to initiate, right? It is our initiation. And I feel that women also avoid that again because of our DNA structure to be wired for survival, right? We will do what we can to self-preserve, but to our own detriment many times when we avoid kind of like the internal masculine erecting, right? It's a part of you know when you let's say have to well I hope you can relate with this, but when you get married and you say the vows, the moment, and this is my spiritual belief around marriage, when you say the vows, like the formula, like in sickness and in health, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, what's actually happening in that moment alchemically is that you are no longer two entities, but one. That's in a marriage. But like the internal marriage of like masculine and feminine aspects inside of us, that is also what has to happen for women. Like there has to be integration, inner union with like that inner masculine, inner feminine. I can't be just the little girl anymore. I can bring her in. Like in a marriage, it's really important to not lose sight of her. All the archetypal aspects have a place inside of a marriage. So inside of that internal union as well, we when we unite, we create a kingdom. And there's another like phrase in the Bible that I love around this concept of the kingdom. It is the kingdom is within. And a kingdom needs a king and a queen for it to be like actually a kingdom that inspires. Notice how like royals, we kind of like who's okay, if there's a king, where's the queen? You know, there's always this native, like natural pull for us to look for the feminine and the masculine within a kingdom. So it's the same for our internal kingdom as well, right? And this is how I like to describe how a woman flourishes and how she is able, if her internal kingdom has a king and a queen inside of her, meaning the masculine principles are erected, right? And then the wisdom provides the wise counsel and the beauty and the allure and kind of like just that feminine essence, right? Then it influences, like a king and queen influence their kingdom, what they create, what is in their territory and domain. And so, absolutely, like internal union is foundational to a woman out there in relationship to men, like literal men, in relationship with principles like business, money, investing, assets, growth, anything that has to do with the financial, um, starts with the internal inner union within herself. So,